they built it for him. His name, his idea, his stage. And this week, according to multiple reports across the royal commentary world, the very people who helped run the Invictus Games started asking a question that would have been unthinkable a year ago: does Prince Harry still belong at the top of the thing he created? Commentators claim he did not take it well. One put it bluntly: he treated a boardroom disagreement like a family betrayal. And the more you look at how this reportedly unfolded, quietly, over months, ending in one tense meeting, the clearer it becomes that this was never really about spreadsheets. It was about control, and about a man who has run out of institutions willing to give it to him. Over the next half hour I'm going to take you through the whole thing, start to finish, what Invictus actually means to Harry, who really holds the power now, the two cracks that reportedly split the board, what is said to have happened in that meeting, and where this leaves the one project he calls his legacy. Everything here is commentary and attributed reporting. You decide what you believe. If you want royal coverage without the spin, subscribe and hit the bell. We cover the fallout every single day. Let's begin. To understand why a governance dispute could shake Prince Harry to his core, you have to understand what Invictus is to him, and it's not what most casual viewers assume. When Harry stepped back from royal life, he didn't just lose a job. He lost an entire identity. The patronages were gone. The honorary military appointments, the ones he wore with genuine pride, were stripped. The framework that made him a working prince, with duties and a place and a purpose, simply dissolved. And into that void, one thing remained standing: the Invictus Games. The sporting event for wounded, injured, and sick service personnel that he founded and championed. Now here is the part even his critics concede. Invictus did real good. Real veterans, real recovery, real moments of dignity that had nothing to do with Netflix or tabloids. That is not in dispute, and this channel isn't going to pretend it is. But, and commentators keep returning to this, the very fact that Invictus is so genuinely his makes it the most dangerous possible battleground. Because if you take Invictus away from Harry, the argument goes, what exactly is left? A private citizen in California with a famous surname and a grievance. That's the fear the reports describe. That's why a board asking routine questions can feel, to him, like the walls closing in all over again. One royal analyst framed it this way, and I'm quoting the claim, not stating it as fact: Invictus is the last thing that makes him Prince Harry and not just Mr. Sussex of Montecito. Threaten it, and you threaten the whole story he tells about himself. Harsh? But you can see why any challenge to his leadership of it would land like a knife, not a memo. You'd expect. Here's what most viewers don't realize. An event the size of the Invictus Games isn't run by one man with a vision. It's run by a foundation, a whole apparatus of directors, trustees, executives, and sponsors, each with a stake, a budget line, and a say. And over the years, as Invictus grew from a bold idea into a global operation spanning multiple host nations, that apparatus grew with it. That growth is the hidden engine of this entire story. Because in the early days, reports suggest, Harry was effectively the sun the whole thing orbited around. His star power raised the money. His name opened the doors. What he wanted, largely, happened. But an organization that big eventually develops something every founder dreads, a will of its own. Professional managers who answer to governance rules, not to a founder's feelings. Sponsors who expect accountability for millions of dollars. A board whose legal duty is to the mission and the money, not to any one personality, no matter how royal. And that, commentators argue, is the collision course that was set years ago and only now reached impact. The founder who is used to being the center of gravity, meeting the institution that has quietly decided it no longer revolves around him. It's a story as old as organizations themselves. It just happens to have a prince at the center of this one. Money. Let's be careful here, because this is where sensational channels start inventing numbers. I'm not going to do that. What the reports describe, and it's described consistently, is not a scandal of missing money. It's a dispute about how money is directed, controlled, and accounted for. Here's the tension as commentators lay it out. A global charity handling large sums has to satisfy sponsors, auditors, and regulators. That means process, approvals, oversight. The unglamorous machinery that keeps a big organization clean and fundable. And reports suggest that as the board tightened that machinery, as it should, some of it began to feel, to the founder, like a leash. Every decision that once flowed through him now had to flow through a process he didn't fully control. To a professional board, that's simply good governance. To a founder who built the thing on instinct and star power, commentators claim, it can feel like being slowly edged out of your own house, not with a dramatic vote, but with 100 small procedures that each say, politely, you don't decide this alone anymore. And that reframes the money story entirely, doesn't it? It was never really about the money. It was about what the money represented, control. Whose hand is on the wheel? Which brings us to the second crack, the one commentators say actually broke things. Control is the real fault lying in almost every founder versus board war, and according to the reports, this one is no different. The picture painted across the commentary space is of a board that increasingly wanted a genuine say, in direction, in strategy, in the future of the games, and a founder who, whatever he said publicly, still expected the final word. And when those two expectations meet, there is no gentle outcome. Either the board backs down and becomes a rubber stamp, or the founder accepts that he is now one voice among several. Reports suggest neither side was willing to blink. Now, I want to be fair, because this channel is supposed to be. There's a version of this where Harry is right. Founders often protect their creation from committees that don't share the original vision. Sometimes the board really is overreaching. His defenders make exactly that case, and it's not a stupid one. The problem is that this particular founder arrives at this particular fight carrying a very heavy reputation, the reputation, fair or not, of a man who has struggled to accept anyone else's authority since he left the palace. So even when he may have a point, the point lands inside a story the public has already decided. And that's the cruel trap the commentators describe. In a governance fight, perception is everything, and Harry walked in with the worst possible perception for a founder in a control dispute, the man who couldn't be managed. Whether that's fair is genuinely for you to decide. Comment below, do you think the board overreached, or is this Harry's pattern catching up with him? I read every one, and the sharpest goes in the next video. Here's where I have to be scrupulously honest with you, because this is where the sensational versions go completely off the rails. Nobody narrating this on YouTube, including me, has a transcript of that meeting. What we have is a remarkably consistent account being repeated across the commentary world. Treat it as that, a consistent claim, not a court record. The version being shared goes like this. The board raised its concerns, direction, spending, control, in the direct way boards do. And Harry, according to the accounts, reacted less like a chairman receiving feedback and more like a prince being told, no. Not necessarily shouting. Something colder and more revealing, the sense that he experienced legitimate oversight as a personal attack. And that detail, if it's even partly true, is the whole story in miniature. Because a chairman hears, we have concerns, and asks, what are they? A wounded man hears, we have concerns, and asks, why is everyone always against me? The reports describe the second reaction. And a board watching that reaction, commentators claim, would have quietly concluded it had made its point, and that the point was proven by the response itself. That's the trap of the meltdown narrative. The more you insist the institution is out to get you, the more you hand the institution its reason. Whether Harry fell into it exactly as described, we can't know. But the fact that every serious voice in this space is telling the same shape of story is why it's trending, and why it's so hard to dismiss. The phrase that keeps surfacing, across nearly every account, is that Harry took it personally. And commentators like the authors and columnists who follow this closely argue that this is the through line of his entire post-royal life, a pattern of experiencing structure, rules, and pushback as betrayal. Think about the irony the critics keep pointing to, because it is genuinely striking. Harry spent years telling the world the palace was an unfeeling institution that boxed him in. And now, if the reports are right, the institution questioning him isn't the palace at all. It's not his father. It's not his brother. It's the foundation he built, staffed with people he helped bring in. His own house. One widely shared comment summed it up: he escaped one institution only to recreate the same fight inside the one he made himself. You don't have to agree with that reading. Plenty of people think Harry is simply defending something precious from bureaucrats. But even his defenders have gone quieter, and that silence is its own kind of verdict. When the people who usually rush to explain you stop rushing, something has shifted. And here's the part that lifts this above simple royal gossip, because it's a pattern that plays out far beyond palaces. Almost every founder who builds something big enough eventually collides with the very structure success forces them to create. The visionary who starts a company in a garage wakes up one day to find a board, investors, and executives who all believe, often correctly, that the founder's instincts that built the thing are now the biggest risk to scaling it. History is full of founders pushed out of the companies bearing their own names, by boards that concluded the creator had become the obstacle. Seen through that lens, commentators argue, Harry's situation is almost ordinary. Take away the crown and the surname, and this is a textbook founder versus board struggle, the passionate creator who can't quite accept that the thing he birthed now has stakeholders, rules, and a life of its own. In that sense, some of his defenders have a real point. Founders are frequently right that the committee doesn't share the vision. But here's why the ordinary framing doesn't save him. Most founders in that fight get the benefit of the doubt, because the public roots for the underdog creator against the faceless suits. Harry, uniquely, walks in with the public already primed to see him as the problem, not the victim, because of everything that came before. So the one narrative that might have made him sympathetic, the scrappy founder defending his baby, curdles into the opposite, the man who, yet again, won't be managed. Same fight, opposite sympathy. That's the trap, and it's one he largely built himself. And you cannot tell a Sussex story without the question everyone asks: where was Meghan in all of this? According to the commentary, the answer is, notably absent. Reports suggest she kept her distance from the Invictus turmoil, and in the narrative being pushed this week, that distance is being read as loudly as Harry's alleged reaction. Critics claim her absence speaks volumes. Supporters would say she was simply staying out of a lane that isn't hers, which is a perfectly reasonable thing for a spouse to do. But here's the trap she's reportedly caught in, and it's real. If she steps in to defend him, the critics say she's controlling, that she can't let him have one thing of his own. If she stays out, the same critics say she abandoned him the moment it got hard. There is no move the anti-Sussex commentary won't spin against her. That doesn't make her sympathetic to this audience, but it does show how locked in the story has become. Once public opinion tilts, every choice is read through the same dark lens. And notice how the two stories feed each other. The board dispute makes Harry look isolated. Meghan's distance makes him look more isolated. And the more isolated he looks, the more every headline gets framed as the walls closing in. That's a narrative snowball, and snowballs are very hard to stop once the audience wants them to keep rolling. There's one more layer, and it's the one that gives this whole saga its weight, the long shadow of the palace. Because you cannot separate how the public reads an Invictus boardroom fight from everything that came before it, the interviews, the book, the security battle, the years of open conflict with his family. Commentators argue that the establishment, and the wider British public, now view almost any Harry setback through a single settled lens, the prince who couldn't be managed, finally meeting the limits of a world that won't simply hand him control. Prince William, reports have long claimed, is the harder line, less inclined to overtures, more protective of institutions. And the king, whatever warmth remained, is said to have grown weary. So when a story breaks that Harry is clashing with his own board, it doesn't land in a vacuum. It lands as one more chapter in a story the public thinks it already understands. Is that fair to Harry? Maybe not entirely. A man shouldn't be convicted of a boardroom dispute by the verdict of an old family feud. But that is the environment he operates in now, and, his critics would argue, one he helped build with his own words. And in all of this, the egos, the board, the headlines, the family shadow, there's one group almost nobody in the commentary storm is talking about. The veterans. The wounded servicemen and women that Invictus was built for in the first place. Because whatever you think of Harry, and whatever you think of the board, a prolonged power struggle at the top of a charity has a very real cost, and it isn't paid by the prince or the directors. It's paid by the mission. When a founder and a board go to war, energy that should go to the cause gets burned on the fight. Sponsors get nervous. Uncertainty creeps in. Good people on staff start watching the exits. And commentators across the spectrum, even one sympathetic to Harry, quietly acknowledge that a drawn-out revolt helps no one who actually depends on the games. That's the uncomfortable truth beneath the drama. Both sides insist they're the ones protecting Invictus. Both sides claim the mission is exactly what they're fighting for. But a mission doesn't care who wins a boardroom. It only suffers while the fight drags on. That's worth sitting with, because it's the part the outrage machine skips. The clicks come from Harry loses it and board revolt. The real stakes are quieter and more human, whether the thing that genuinely helped people survives the people fighting over who gets to run it. You decide who's really protecting it, but don't lose sight of who actually stands to lose. Let's follow the money one more layer, because it's the part that will actually decide how this ends, not the drama, the money. An event on the scale of the Invictus Games doesn't run on goodwill. It runs on sponsors, on partnerships, on host nation commitments, and on the confidence of serious institutions that their name is safe attached to it. And confidence, commentators point out, is the single most fragile thing in the whole equation. Here's why that matters for this fight. Big sponsors do not like instability at the top of the thing they fund. They don't like headlines about founders clashing with boards. They don't like uncertainty about who's in charge or which direction the organization is heading. Every week this story stays in the royal chaos news cycle, reports suggest, is a week that makes the quiet, essential work of keeping those partners on board that little bit harder. Nobody pulls out over one bad headline. But funding relationships are built on trust and stability, and a prolonged power struggle chips at both. And that reframes the board's position in a way the pure, they're attacking Harry narrative misses. Part of a board's job, legally, actually, is to protect the organization's ability to keep raising money and delivering the mission. If they genuinely believed the founder's approach was becoming a risk to that, then tightening control isn't a betrayal, it's the exact thing they are supposed to do. Harry's defenders will say they overstepped. His critics will say they were protecting the games from the one person who couldn't stop making it about himself. The truth, as usual, is probably somewhere in the tension between those two, and the sponsors, watching quietly from the sidelines, may end up being the ones who decide who was right. So let's ask the question almost nobody in this space bothers to ask, because outrage doesn't need solutions: could Harry actually still save this? And the honest answer is, yes, fairly easily, if he were willing to do the one thing the reports suggest he finds hardest. Founders survive board conflicts all the time. The ones who come out stronger do it by making a specific, counterintuitive move. They let go of the small things to keep the big one. They accept the process, they embrace the oversight, they publicly champion the board rather than fighting it, and in doing so, they reassure everyone that the mission is bigger than their ego. Paradoxically, the founder who loosens his grip is usually the one who keeps the most real influence, because everyone stops seeing him as the risk. The path back for Harry, in other words, isn't complicated. Step forward as the passionate figurehead who raises the money and inspires the veterans, and let the professionals run the machine. Frame the board not as enemies but as partners protecting the thing he loves. Kill the founder under siege story by simply refusing to play the victim. Commentators note that if he did that, this entire revolt could evaporate within weeks, and he'd come out looking mature and secure. The reason so many doubt he will, according to those same commentators, is the whole theme of this video. The reports describe a man who experiences letting go of control as losing, and losing as betrayal. If that read is right, the tragedy isn't that the board is out to get him. It's that the one move that would save his legacy is the exact move his own instincts fight hardest against. Whether he can overcome that, you decide. But it's the real question underneath all the noise. So, cutting through all of it, what actually happens now? Here's the honest read. The most likely outcome isn't a dramatic firing or a public expulsion. It's quieter and, in a way, sadder, a founder whose grip loosens by degrees, as a professional board takes more and more of the wheel, and whose role slowly shifts from the man who decides to the man whose name is on the door. Not a coup. An erosion. Best case for Harry, the reports get walked back, cooler heads prevail, and he keeps meaningful control of the thing he loves. Worst case, according to the more dramatic voices, he ends up a figurehead in his own foundation, the ultimate fallout for a man who left one institution only to lose his footing in the next. Nobody knows which. Anyone who tells you they are certain is guessing. What's undeniable is that the ground has shifted, and even Invictus, the one safe harbor, no longer feels entirely his. So here's where I land. Forget the word meltdown. The real story isn't one bad meeting. It's a founder discovering that the last institution he controlled has, like all the others, developed a mind of its own, and reacting to that discovery in a way that may have sealed the very outcome he feared. Tell me your verdict in the comments. Is the board out of line, or is this Harry's own pattern catching up with him one final time? If this is the coverage you want, subscribe and turn on the bell. We're here every single day breaking down the fallout. And stick around, because next time we're getting into the report that the king has reportedly run out of patience, for good. You won't want to miss it. Pessoa X, Harry Meghan, Tom_Bauer Entram N.A. Taylor, Charles William Keane No B-roll 8 Voce Jail Loss.